Hello and welcome to Eastern Roman History. After the reconquest of Constantinople in AD 1261, over a process of 80 years, Roman Asia Minor slowly disintegrated and was conquered by a multitude of Turkish adventurers. This video is in collaboration with Ottoman History Hub. His is a channel on YouTube that looks at the history of the Ottoman Empire, from its inception by Osman to the last Ottoman Sultan after the First World War. I shall look at the fall of Roman Asia Minor from the Roman perspective, and my partner shall look at things from the Turkish perspective. To give some context, the area stretching from the Meander Valley in the south to Paphlagonia in the north had been held by the Empire of Nicaea for 60 years, from when Theodore I originally carved out his small Empire of Nicaea from the shattered remains of the Eastern Roman Empire after the fall of Constantinople in 1204, to the reconquest of Constantinople by Michael VIII in AD 1261. After this point, however, the fortunes of the Roman hold over Asia Minor started to decline, until in AD 1329, at the Battle of Peloponnesus, any hope at trying to stem the loss of this province was lost, and the Eastern Roman Empire left the few areas still under their control to their fate. To explore and explain this event, I shall answer a series of questions that should throw some light on the subject. Firstly, what was the Nicean system of defense against the Turks? The strategic defense of the eastern frontier of the Nicean Empire relied on settled military colonies along the front lines that were inhabited by a mixture of native and foreign groups, whose task it was to protect their lands. As a reward, these frontiersmen were granted tax exemptions, and some grants of pronoia and letters of commendation by the emperor himself as incentives to remain on the frontiers. Throughout the Nicean period, the eastern frontier was maintained by these frontiersmen. In addition, the Nicean emperors were able to take advantage of the Mongol invasions of the crumbling Seljuk Sultanate of Rum to make sure that the frontier remained in their hands. John III was responsible for building additional defensive structures such as a chain of forts along the Meander Valley to protect it from raids. General peace was maintained with the Seljuk Sultanate with skillful diplomacy for most of the Nicean period. What was the policy of the Paleologan emperors after the restoration of the Eastern Roman Empire toward Asia Minor in 1261 to 1329? After the Trikarchian revolt perpetrated by frontiersmen in December 1261, Michael VIII altered the arrangement of the Anatolian defences. An official called Constantine Cadenos oversaw land reform in Asia Minor. George Pachymeres reports what occurred. George Pachymeres, History, Book 1, Chapter 5. And very quickly, Cadenos inspected the regions, finding exceedingly rich men weighed down with property and herds, and he imposed military service upon them, away from those things of their own by which the livelihood of each was constituted, and counting out 40 nomismata for each, for the most part from their own property. He ordered that the balance of the tax which had been imposed, being not a little, be sent to the imperial treasury. Doing this for the first time, when these men suffered something that they had never expected, he broke the courage of these willing men and compromised their strength. For Michael, this gained for him a new source of troops and money for his western campaigns. Michael punished the Anatolians for their loyalty to John IV and imposed greater government control over the frontiers. However, it fundamentally weakened the defences of Anatolia, which had worked for decades, and seriously weakened their morale. This turns some of these former frontiersmen to brigandage, some to desert or hide from their duties, and others to flee into Europe. This is seen as the beginning of the unravelling of the Roman hold over Anatolia. Things had deteriorated to such an extent that Emperor Michael had to personally lead armies there from 1280 to 1282. In addition, the landowners and officials in charge of the armies of Anatolia often paid their soldiers less than what they were owed and embezzled the difference, further reducing morale. Andronicus II did his best to try and mitigate the collapse of Anatolia. His most concerted efforts took place in 1290 to 1305. However, he might have been in a better position to deal with the crisis had he not disbanded the navy and reduced the standing army at the beginning of his reign. Unfortunately, none of his measures yielded long-term results, perhaps an indication of Andronicus's own lack of skill as a statesman. In the 1290s, he moved to Nicaea and repaired forts and city walls. He gave Alexios Philanthropenos control over all of the armies of Anatolia and settled Cretan refugees in military colonies in Anatolia as replacement of Crete. Alexios Philanthropenos retook the Meander Valley in 1294 to 1295, but this competent general rebelled and was defeated. The Eastern Roman defeat at the Battle of Bafus in July 1302 by the Ottomans caused Andronicus to hire a large mercenary band, the Catalan Grand Company of 6,500 men, to drive out the Turks. In 1303, they drove out the Turks by launching a campaign from Cyzicus to Philadelphia. However, the Catalans were as bad as the Turks in burning and looting as they went. In addition, as soon as the Catalans left an area, the Turks returned to continue raiding and pillaging. The Catalans turned on the Romans in 1305 after their leader was assassinated. Andronicus III attempted to rescue Nicaea that was under siege by the Ottomans, and at least preserve Bithynia as a Roman province. At the Battle of Peloponnesus, Andronicus III and his army was defeated. After this, he chose to keep the Turks contained in Anatolia rather than try to restore the territory. The battle effectively marked the end of imperial policy towards Eastern Roman Anatolia and the point at which its fall became inevitable. What external threats prevented the Romans from committing more resources to Asia Minor? The attention of Michael VIII and Andronicus II was largely taken up with threats from the west. Michael had to manage a serious risk of Charles of Anjou, King of Naples, attacking the empire. In addition, Michael had to deal with Bulgaria, Serbia, Genoa, Venice, and the Latin states in Greece, which all drew Michael's attention. Andronicus, who took a far more defensive stance than Michael, still had to deal with all of these threats except Charles of Anjou, who died in 1285, but undermined his own ability to deal with aggressive neighbours by disbanding many of his military forces and not maintaining their institutions. After the revolt of the Catalan Company, Andronicus also had to deal with them. Finally, Andronicus II had to deal with a civil war with his grandson Andronicus III from 1321 to 1328, which further drew his attention away from Anatolia. George Pachymeres connects the denuding of the East of its soldiers and the later exodus of many of its inhabitants to why the Turks were able to utterly overwhelm the defences of Western Asia Minor. What did Anatolians themselves think of the government in Constantinople? Did this have an impact? Anatolia was a major beacon of support for many of the opponents of Michael VIII, such as supporters of Emperor John IV, the exiled Patriarch Arsenios, and the exiled Patriarch Joseph. When Michael VIII died, he was so unpopular he was not even given a Christian burial. Combined with the endemic corrupt practices of officials in Andronicus's reign, this had the effect of significantly weakening the Anatolians' morale and connection to the government in Constantinople. The revolt of Philanthropenos in 1295 can be seen as a direct result of his practical success against the Turks and the feeling of discontent towards the Paleologoi. It did not help that many of the sailors dismissed by Andronicus II at the beginning of his reign found new employment among the Turkish peoples and many Roman citizens, once the Turks started to settle in their territory, tolerated their new masters because it allowed them to escape the crippling taxation of the Eastern Roman Empire. Why did Asia Minor fall? The most significant factors in the fall of Asia Minor appear to be the policies of Michael VIII, which resulted in weakening and demoralizing the area, combined with corruption at the local level. The short-term and cost-efficient policies of Andronicus II, that more often than not backfired with dire consequences without providing any long-term solutions, also contributed. The consistent redirection of imperial attention away from Asia Minor to deal with Western threats, such as Charles of Anjou, Serbia, and the Catalan Company, and the persistence of the Turks in seeking to not only plunder, but conquer and settle in the areas formerly held by the Romans, significantly contributed to the neglect and fall of Asia Minor. Had Andronicus III won the Battle of Peloponnesus in 1329, he would most likely have retained Bithynia, but needed to address the multitude of issues that his predecessors had failed to adequately address to retain it in the long term. Please remember to check out Ottoman History Hub for the Ottoman perspective of the fall of Asia Minor. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and this has been Eastern Roman History.